Thanks, Mattia. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I know you're the
Hi.
founder and CEO of Qubit Technologies. But before we dive into what you are building now, I actually want to take one step back. Let's start with your own professional background before Qubit a little bit, just to give a sense of where you come from to our audience, because I know innovation doesn't happen out of thin air, right? So it usually has a past and some history behind it. I'm very curious about that part first. Why don't you take us through your maybe professional background before founding Qubit?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually started my career as a graphics designer. So I always liked creativity, and I found my path in design initially, working essentially for advertising, and then a little bit in fashion. And then, of course, when I started doing graphic designs, computers were just appearing in the design studios. So it was the very early days. And there weren't many people who were actually able to use computer software for design well. So I, practiced and then after some years, the whole, web and the dot-com boom came about. So everything became more and more digital. From just, paper design, we started doing web design, and I opened my own graphics design studio, doing a little bit of, print, paper, and corporate image, and also web design. And so that's how I started. And then, obviously the world went more and more digital, and so did my job. From creativity, I shifted more to technology development, digital technology development, and then eventually to 3D virtual worlds and virtual reality. So I was, from design, I was being pulled into this world that was more technology based. And there, after some years, I started with Qubit.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that interesting journey before Qubit. And just to set the stage, could you give us maybe one or two sentences to describe what Qubit Technologies does today?
But when I started doing virtual worlds, I had founded another company before Qubit that was specialized in developing experiences in a virtual world that is called Second Life, that is still there today. At the time, it was something very new, cutting edge, and companies were very interested in building their own space in this virtual world. There were other virtual worlds at the time that were appearing. This is way before Roblox or any of these experiences. But Second Life was definitely the one that had more success. I essentially converted the activity of my graphics design studio into a developer of Second Life, virtual experiences. And I opened some Google Ads, and then, companies started inquiring about our services, and we started selling Second Life spaces. We would build 3D environments for companies' presence on this virtual world, and this was very successful at the beginning because there was a very high demand, and it was way before headsets or anything like this. It was still an experience for computers, but companies were interested in having a space on this platform because it was very innovative. So in terms of branding, it was for a company being there meant to be innovative, to be cutting edge. And so there was a very high demand. There was a lot of press, also press coverage on what companies were doing in this virtual world, because everybody was kind of curious about what was happening in this strange new place online. Like after a moment of peak, companies started essentially losing interest in this virtual world because it became more of a place where single people would meet up, and they would create content, but companies were not madly satisfied about the results in the end. Yeah.
Which year that was when you see the shift in the interest? When did you see an emergence of the popular interest come in, and when did you see it dip down?
Yes, so consider that Second Life was launched in 1999. I started working with it in 2005, and we finished working with it 5 years later, maybe 2010 or something, 29. And there were some limitations at the time that made it really difficult for companies to have a space in this experience. I mean, companies wanted to host their own spaces on their own servers. This was not possible at the time, and there were a number of technical difficulties. From this experience, I actually started doing something else after that time. I met a company that needed to develop a new e-commerce project. So I worked for two years on a 2D standard e-commerce portal that was a very large project, but was still, like, compared to what we were doing before, was still like less innovative, if you will. And then I kept the passion for virtual worlds and 3D, and I always thought that this would eventually become the future of the internet. So I decided at one point to start another company, which was Qubit, essentially developing 3D experiences using the new physics engine, gaming engines that were being developed at the time, like Unity. And we started experimenting in different domains, from training, entertainment, product presentations, e-commerce, and virtual museums. So that's how we really started. And yeah, and we had a number of very successful years. We had some wonderful experiences working side by side, some major brands, and building all these immersive experiences for the first time. It was a really great experience. And in 2017, we launched the first fully working 3D virtual store where you could actually, browse in 3D, see products in 3D, and buy products. So learning experiences are definitely, the killer app of virtual reality.
At this point, what it sounds to me is like those marketing experience, like interactive in-store fancy experience, are really something nice to have, right? And then the training is something that you need to have. Kind of this comparison. So nice to have is something like probably you get your basic needs met, then you go consider those nice to have needs. But the training is what you have to consider at the first place. It's a need to have kind of requirements.
Yes, that's very true. There are clear metrics that prove, and there have been a lot of studies done throughout the years that prove that training in VR in a simulation is very effective. People are very engaged, especially if you wear a headset. People are concentrated, they are inside the experience. They are engaged because, typically it's nicer to do something like this rather than, sitting in a classroom or listening to somebody or watching some slides or studying on a document. So especially for activities that are very practical, manual, like operating machinery, factory type of settings, refineries, or any type of setting that represent dangers, are ideal for training simulations, because you either could not easily simulate the types of situations that you would encounter, like imagine an explosion in a refinery. You either experience it or you leave it in a simulation. It's not easy to reproduce. At the same time, in a factory, you cannot stop machines to train people. So it's difficult to train people because the machines keep going 24 hours. So it's not like you stop and try out things for people to learn. So in these instances, virtual training has proven very effective, as well as other sectors like medical, medicine, and schools and universities. The problem with that is still today the cost, because it takes time and effort to build a training simulation. Our mistake, if you will, because what we did is we built several projects for several companies, but we never focused on building, one specific product for an industry. For example, there are companies in the US that have built, that are verticalized on, for example, a welding simulator or a certain type of machinery simulations. So they invested in building a product that, then was ready to go to market, and so they could sell it to many people at a lower cost. What we did
Like a
is we built,
vertical focused, like a domain
yes,
vertical focused. Yeah, then you
yes,
can
yes,
probably go deeper.
yes. But the problem to do that is that you need a lot more investment. Like you need to be able to work for, a long time on building the product. And, you're building a platform, so it's not, something that you do in a couple of months, so you probably need to work 1 or 2 years to build the product. And I've seen, companies that have invested great amounts of money throughout the years, even companies, for example, working for the military, that obviously is one sector that uses a lot training simulations, that have invested a lot in building this kind of products, but they still have to monetize their investments, because it takes a lot, and because the market is still at the very beginning. When you say training simulations are more of a need to companies, the reality is companies do not actually perceive this yet. They know this is going to come, they know the possibilities, but they're very expensive to produce and they take time. So before investing in building such a product, they think twice and they have other ways to approach the training situation. For schools, typically schools do not have the budgets to afford something like this. So the job in producing these type of experiences is very labor intensive still. But I think, in the next years, it will be streamlined a lot thanks to AI and, automation. And that will make the breakthrough because this will reduce costs of production and, will enable a bigger adoption. Don't forget, lastly, and to conclude, that like VR headsets are not really usable. You cannot use them for a long period of time.
Indeed, I'm one of those people. Whenever wearing VR headset, I get dizzy. It's like a car sickness,
exactly.
motion sickness.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and this is a showstopper immediately. Like if you go to a company and you make somebody feel sick, how you're going to sell them, the solution. So, there are problems to be solved yet. If I had to invest in something today, I would focus on a single niche. Either it could be in education, like building a platform where teachers can find several experiences in different subjects that can be used in school, universities, in support of the training program. A lot of schools have bought VR headsets that are sitting there not being used.
So why so? Why the schools would purchase VR headset but then not using it? Because you said one of the obstacles was the cost was too high, right? But they already paid for it. And why they not use it?
Yeah. Well, they pay for the headset, not the software. So once you buy a headset, the headset is actually cheap. And then they found out that they need to buy content. And unless you find an application on a marketplace like the Oculus market, the Meta marketplace, or Steam VR, which are dedicated marketplaces where you can find VR apps, unless you find a product to buy. Like for example, there is a simulation of the human anatomy. You buy it once, you can use it, and but you have to buy it for every headset that you want it on. But okay, it's something that probably would cost you, I don't know, maybe $20, $30. Then it's affordable. But you have to find something that is already made. And there are not many available experiences on several subjects.
You mentioned that the hardware cost is on the relatively low side, but more expensive is the software, right? And also before you said companies, they don't want to invest so heavily into developing a product, like virtual product for themselves. But do you mean that one virtual product is created only for one customer? You cannot standardize it? For example, if you create a software for human anatomy, then you cannot kind of license it to hundreds of schools. In that way, you bring the cost down, right? Why, with today's technology, the cost of this is still so high?
No, you can definitely. That's what I meant when I said you need to verticalize and build a product, because then you can sell it, you can license it to many companies. So that's the way to approach it. So I think, and again, that was our mistake, if you will, because we were not able to verticalize, mainly for two reasons. One, we didn't find enough investments to do that. So our funding was very little compared to other markets. So in order to build a product, you need to be well funded, and you need to not just to build the product, but also to go to market. Because, for example, like in the case of the platform for schools that I told you before, first you need to build it, then you need to go to all the schools, universities, and sell it. And it takes an organization to do that. So it takes funding and it takes time. But definitely the way to go is, build the product and license it. Absolutely.
And take one step back. I think you had this vision of a 3D internet way before this was even a topic in mainstream conversation, right? How would you describe, what did you mean by 3D internet per se to people who are not familiar with this concept? Does that mean in the future, the whole internet would be 3D, would be interactive?
Well, that is a vision that comes from movies back in the days, like from Tron to other Matrix, where the internet was imagined to be fully immersive. And yes, I believe at a certain point we will get to that. So what it means is, instead of having a flat screen, you have a 3D dimension where you immerse yourself in, and you either use headsets to have the perception of 3D, or you can also navigate in 3D using a computer. You essentially, instead of having a flat website, you have a space. You have like a simulation of a physical location where you navigate and you go through content. Not everything works well in 3D. So some types of content and experiences are better experienced in 2D. For example, if you have to read the text, you don't need 3D or anything. So I don't think necessarily every component in the web will become 3D. But as we go along, there will be more and more the possibility of entering very advanced simulations. And again, I think here AI plays a big role, because AI will be able to render very complex simulations that would otherwise cost a lot to produce. And I also think the way we would connect to these advanced simulations, not necessarily through a headset or glasses, but more through some kind of connector that we will develop in the future to be able to directly connect ourselves to machines, like in the movies, if you will. But if you think of companies like Neuralink, for example, who are already producing brain chips, you can speculate that soon those brain implants will be able to connect you to a virtual dimension, instead of, like somehow disconnect the senses from the physical world and connect them to an alternative world. Obviously, this is still science fiction today. I do believe this will be possible eventually.
Yeah, maybe not just more advanced or complex 3D, but also simpler 3D in the sense that more natural 3D. Because today we all depending on a device, right? External device. Maybe in the future, you don't need additional device. Everything that we have in our daily life would naturally become an object that carrying data, information, sensors. For example, when I reach home, maybe my wall can become a screen. You just have to turn it on. And you don't need an extra TV monitor machine, but your wall can turn into a screen kind of thing. Or your daily glasses can turn into a VR machine. You don't need an additional headset, something like that. That's what I had in my mind for the future kind of immersive world where you don't really feel the extra burden of extra devices.
Yes, and because the device is a burden today. I mean, they're very bulky, they're uncomfortable, they make you sick, they're heavy. And there are some wonderful applications, for example, also in fitness, like VR fitness apps, I think are a very interesting domain to explore. I think you're cycling on a bike inside a gym. Instead of looking at the wall and cycling, you can wear a VR headset and be cycling in the mountains, and it makes the fitness experience much better. The problem there is again, like it's not nice to do fitness with something like this on your face and you get sweaty and it's heavy after a while, you don't feel well.
Cool. Coming back to your company building, when you realized the market wasn't moving as fast as you had hoped, what did you do first to keep QbitTech alive back then?
Well, we kept looking for ways to sell. We invested, more heavily in advertising, in promoting the services that we did, and then also in consulting. I developed a certain experience in innovation throughout these years because while I was working with Qubit, I also always had an academic side of my job. I'm still today a research affiliate of the Institute for the Future, which is a research institute in Palo Alto in the US. I developed through that experience a capability for consulting companies on innovation strategy using a specific methodology for future foresight. So what I did is began entering more the consulting world. And then AI came in when the generative AI boom started. It seemed like every company shifted their interest to artificial intelligence. If you look at the investments done in artificial intelligence in Silicon Valley, for example, there are twice as much as all the other digital technologies put together. So, there was an incredible shift of venture capital to that. Today, if you start a tech company and you don't have AI into them, basically you cannot get funding. So
Yeah, I mean, trends come and go. I also learned that the VC is a group of people who almost always follow the trends.
yes, and actually the VC world went down as well in the last years. We're not living in years of a lot of prosperity in terms of investment. The companies and funds are very careful in what they invest in. We're still in a situation where there are wars all over the place. There is instability, there is insecurity from the market. We're not in times where, people feel very comfortable spending money. Also, the investment market contracted a lot.
One more detail I picked up from your profile is that you said your riskiest move so far was relying on a single investor. I'd love to unpack that a little bit. What happened back then, and also how did that experience impact how you think about funding and partnerships today?
Well, I told you before that we did not, in the first years of the company, we did not focus on a specific vertical and we did not focus on building a product. This has changed at a certain point because we realized that we had to build a product and we were unsure on what vertical to focus because we had experienced many different, possibilities. We had various smaller investors like, friends and family type of investors, Some business angels invested in us. But then we met one investor that expressed interest in, scaling the company and building a product with us that was focused actually on e-commerce in 3D and in basically creating a platform that would allow people to build their own virtual spaces. So essentially our product idea was to create a platform that would allow others easily build their own 3D experiences, whether it was a virtual store or a virtual training space, a virtual classroom. So basically we would give them the templates, the basic features that would allow anyone without any coding knowledge to create their own immersive space. We signed an agreement and we basically, to get the company funded for over $1.5 million in 1.5 years of development, and obviously for some equity of the company. But then we were really unlucky because our investor actually basically went bankrupt in his activity. So he could make the first payments, but then could not go through the whole investment. So basically, we were left with no investment at a certain point. And so, we started, growing the team, building this product, but then we could never finish the product. Then, of course, we tried to find other investors, but we were not able to. Myself, probably not the best person to raise money, even though I think, I can be very credible and honest about things. Maybe, I don't have the best profile as a fundraiser. Maybe I'm more of a project person, able to put teams together, to build things, to launch and sell things rather than find investors. And also, like, the nature of our company was very, from the beginning, it was a virtual company. We never had an office. We were like people from all over the world working together. Our office, by choice, was a virtual space. We always had a 3D office online, and this was the nature of our business. We wanted to also prove that there could be possible to really work remotely and meet up in the same space online and collaborate. Also because the sense of presence that you have online in a 3D space is much different than 2D. Like here, we are seeing each other in video, but our presence is still filtered by, we have a screen, we have a camera, and there are 2 layers of filters in between us. And we cannot move inside a space together. If you are in a virtual space, you with your avatar, you move inside the same space. You have a different perception of the user presence. Being entirely virtualized and not, even though our company is obviously registered as a company in the US and everything, we're registered in California, and the fact that we were always so dispersed probably made it more difficult for investors to believe in the company in a sense.
You think having a physical office, physical space would have helped?
So if you want to get investors for a business in innovation, you need to go to a place where people invest in innovation. And for people to invest in you, you have to be there. It's not necessarily a matter of, having a physical office, but it's having your physical presence in a place. Being a resident in a place, people need to rely on you because they see you there. And, also the team is there. And
you mentioned that have an interactive presence, like in the game, is quite different from what we are having, for example, now on Zoom, you and me, right? You actually have probably your avatar interaction with each other in that immersive space. So back then, did you build something like this, like a platform for your team who work remotely?
We used existing platforms like Unity or Second Life to build a virtual space to collaborate. You cannot call it a platform, but it was more a single solution that we developed to do that, to meet online in between ourselves and collaborate.
That reminds me of another successful startup story I'm sure you have heard about, which is Slack, right? For example, Slack was initially building a gaming company, but what initially went popular and really made a success for the company was the internal communication tool they built for the company while building the games.
Yes, obviously, this was also in the time where, things in the physical world happened that made online collaboration more important. Just think of COVID or that, made it impossible for people to meet in person, especially in certain countries. So this platform became vital, and also the rise of remote work, gig work, offshore development teams obviously contributed to the success of these platforms that would enable effective collaboration. We tried to do this in 3D, but it was too early, complex again, too costly, too difficult for people to truly benefit from 3D immersive spaces.
That relates to the last question today I want to ask you. So for those young and aspiring founders out there who are building things the world might not be ready for yet, what advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Success is extremely difficult, and there are several degrees of success. And when you think of a startup, a lot of young people imagine that, eventually they raise a lot of money and they win the market and so on. And this is, for the majority of cases, actually not true. Most startups are actually unsuccessful. You have to make sure that you have a way out as well. That's very important. Being an entrepreneur is not a choice. You're going to take any risk, you're going to face any struggle because it's your nature. The advice for young people is really understand if you are that or not.
Today, I feel like a lot of people feel they don't fit in anywhere. I think your lesson is to show them that that is not the reason for giving up on themselves, right? Maybe the entrepreneurship is eventually their destination, is somewhere waiting for them if they don't feel like fitting anywhere in today's more and more kind of individualized society.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Mattia, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful conversation and I learned a lot from it. Your story really drives home how much perseverance it takes to build the future, especially when that future isn't quite ready yet. Thanks again for sharing all the highs and lows, the pivots and the lessons. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.